Adventure Ho, Illumineers, and welcome again to another episode of the Ducktail Dads podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Mack, joined again by Nathaniel and Ryan, just the three of us, just a traditional Ducktail Dads episode this week. Thank you again, as always, for joining us on this lovely adventure of Lorcana and these dads. This week, we plan to talk a little bit about the recent Infinity news, or the first iterations of some bigger tournaments that have happened with the Infinity format, as well as diving into some specific Set 12 lists over the course of the next couple weeks, with this week's focus being on some of the toys lists that we've seen in our playtesting. But first and foremost, we will start with our traditional starting segment. What is new in your world? Nathaniel, let's start with you. What is new in your world?
I'll start with the personal life. It is, gentlemen, officially junk day in my town. So let me tell you, they say that the most wonderful time of the year is around Christmas, but I'll say this might be a close second. I love it. Got rid of a bunch of bulky, kind of babyish items that we no longer need. This was great. Other people got to use it, right? So we saw lots of the stuff get picked up by other people, so it gets recycled versus just thrown in the garbage. So that's really awesome. So I'll call that a win. I picked up a wheelbarrow for free, so now I can haul all my brush without breaking my back. Love it. So I'm calling today a huge win. From a Lorcana perspective, I have just been enjoying opening a few packs. I usually always get a trove for every set. As you can see right behind me, there's all the troves from every set of Lorcana. I love doing that. I love just having the dice from each set, storing the cards in the box of the trove for that set. That doesn't always mean that I'm up to date on actually logging all those cards in my online collection, but I at least have them organized in the trove box. So that's been kind of the biggest focus, other than a little bit of online playtesting, but which has been really, really fun. I think there's so many good new cards, Dale, but it's just cool to see some of these things have an impact in Core Constructed. We're also at a really weird time, right? With the fact that it's kind of going a little bit Infinity, kind of going a little bit Constructed. It's a really short set, so I think that'll be really interesting as it kind of plays out over the next few weeks. But that's all I got, fellas. I'll pass it off to Ryan.
On a personal front for me, thanks for the handoff. We did a lot of yard work this weekend. So we got our shed doors replaced. We got some paint stripped off of our play set. So we're going to restain and repaint that soon. After that all dries out. Hopefully it dries out tomorrow. Maybe the next day. But we got to get that done. And then prepping for a trip. So we're prepping for a trip coming up. And so that'll be a fun time for our family together. It'll be a blast. On a Lorcana front, I've been, playing whenever I can, and trying to dial it back just a little bit, because as we were talking before the podcast, it's very accessible now to get to some of these online client games, and so just trying to make sure that still fits into the schedule where it aligns with family priorities, personal priorities, those type of things, and not letting the accessibility and availability of the online client kind of overwhelm the day-to-day life that I'm living. So been enjoying the heck out of it, though. It's been a lot of fun to play with the new cards and identify some of the really powerful new cards that we can play with, and some of the maybe less powerful cards that aren't quite as quite as useful to include in the deck. And we're just kind of gearing up and waiting for set champs to roll around here in a couple of weeks now. It just seems like it's just right upon us out of nowhere, but it is a very short set, as Nathaniel mentioned. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll get more comfortable as the next couple of weeks progress. Mac, what's new in your world?
Busy weekend for me, especially on the personal side. A lot going on. First and foremost, update on my son's dance recital. Went absolutely fabulous. He had such a good time. The only goal that I wanted out of it was, as soon as those bright lights went on, he was just sitting there smiling and just enjoying the moment. He's almost 4, so it's not expected of him to know the entire dance. It was quite funny. He's such a character in the sense that he loves to be front and center and the entertainer. He's very much an extrovert. And he was just dancing and jamming, and he had two main dances, and one of them he started doing dance moves for the other one. And for me and my wife, who know his dances, it was quite hilarious, and he was just eating it all up. But overall, he had a blast. We had some family come in to watch him, so we got to hang out after the recital with that extended family while they were here visiting over the weekend. And then lastly, I was able to plant my garden for the season. So very, very busy weekends with the dance recital family and planting, but all in all, good fun. Really, my boys helped me with the garden, so we had a blast overall. My wife is very much exhausted because she's a teacher of this dance studio, so she was just doing the recitals all weekend. So she's trying to recover from that a little bit. But good, very, very happy and positive weekend for me on the personal side. From a Lorcana side, I finally caught up on my online play testing. I've been building a couple decks here and there, trying to see what works for my play style in this set, and so I'm just trying to test them out. I got 2 or 3 in mind now. I might build another one and try and narrow in once set champ season rolls around, because to Ryan's point, it's like a couple weeks away, which is crazy. I don't know if I like it. I guess I'm going to ask you guys. I feel almost a little overwhelmed on this schedule. I knew it was coming, but like now that we're in the middle of it, it just felt like I just got used to the idea of set 11 and opening the packs, and now we're here. How are you guys feeling about like set 12 right now? Because I'm like, it's all up in my face, and I don't know if I'm ready for it.
I think it is a little aggressive from like a timeline perspective. I think one thing I will say that tends to be something I don't like of the schedule is if set champs finishes and then we have like a dead period for a couple weeks before the next set releases. It kind of feels like that's your sort of time away from Lorcana in a way. Like you can still play obviously and have fun with it and everything, that there's nothing wrong with playing in that timeline, but it feels like you're not really invested in the current metagame if that's something that you care about, because it's about to change. So any like practice that you're going to get, it'll still be helpful for sure, but it's not going to be as applicable than just waiting a couple weeks until some of the new cards are out. Like, and I know there's tons of people out there that will, once those cards have all been revealed, right, like they'll still do plenty of playtesting using proxies or whatever. So there's still plenty, I think, to be had there. But I feel like I don't usually love that. Like I would personally really enjoy it if it was like set champs weekend and then like the next Friday it was like pre-release. So that might be an unpopular opinion, because I think, you know, some people do maybe like a little bit of time in between to like plan their stuff out, right? But I think it'd be really cool to like really quickly kind of be like, okay, set champs is over, turn the page, next set. So that said, I think the turnaround it's almost like whiplash, because it feels like we just got out of a set champs, which we kind of did. So I think in that respect, Mac, like I do enjoy when there's sort of like 3 distinct phases of a set where it's like, hey, for the first 3 weeks, so like pre-release, big box store release, and then like a week or two, there's this like first month hype of it's a lot of pack opening, a lot of just like playing around and figuring out like what's kind of good, what's kind of buns. I think that's like kind of fun to have over the first month. And then your second month can really be more geared around refining some things, maybe more aggressively playtesting and kind of like really getting your list down correctly. Not necessarily always applicable to me because I'm usually net decking. And then the last month of the set being like your set champs time, where it's like, okay, I've done the prep work, like fun early phase excitement, mid-tier, practiced, kind of got down kind of, I think, like the reps I wanted to on the lists I wanted to run. And then now it's like the dress rehearsal time is over. Now it's showtime. I kind of like those 3 very distinct, and my mind really works well, I think, in 3s. This feels almost like pre-release right into set champs. Like there is no middle. Ryan, what do you think?
I think obviously you cut out a whole month out of a cycle here with just the 2-month turnaround, 10-week turnaround rather than a 12 to 14-week turnaround. Yeah, it definitely feels like it's this immediate, all of a sudden, oh, set champs is coming. We got to have to get ready for this. At the same time, I'm hopeful that like this is just like a one-time, one-off as we get into the next rotation. And I think that it will time up well, maybe not with, you know, your personal play schedule, but with, you know, the overarching schedule of set championships, because set championships, I believe, does actually go into the July 4th weekend. So there will be some set championships taking place on that July 4th weekend. And then 2 weeks later, I think is 2 weekends later is when pre-release happens. So I think that'll be like reveal season. Cards will be out at the end of set championships, and then you can start proxy play testing for set 13 plus rotation at that point. So I think you're going to have an opportunity, if you really want to hammer it in, to play test heavily for set 13 with the rotation happening. With the proxy cards or with cards online if that's what you're playing, if that's what you're playing. So I think the next set will feel a little bit more smooth, but definitely this set feels like everything always all at once kind of thing. I think some stores, most stores, half the stores maybe, don't even have set championships posted yet on PlayHub. So we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for when those events are posted. And I'm already looking ahead at my schedule to try to see which weekends I might be able to make. And then just fingers crossed that there's going to be accessible tournaments on those days that I have available to me. So, Mac, back to you.
Yeah, I think this week especially, I've come to realize that all the conversations we've had about like starting with Fabled into Whispers into Winterspell on how like the release of those sets felt a little off. Like we're releasing a winter Christmas based set in February, March, and we're releasing a Halloween set like in November. Like it just seemed like we were like a month or two behind, and this almost feels like the catch up as a result of all of those previous sets that were just stalled backwards. Which makes me feel a little hopeful in the sense that once we get on track and move forward, we'll get back to one set a quarter in that like every 3 months we get a new set, and we get that kind of that 3-stage cycle you were alluding to, Nathaniel. Something tells me that it has to do with the pro scene in the sense of lining up that calendar with the release of the sets as well. Felt like, again, with Fabled and how that was released, the staggering felt a little bit too off to the overall pro scene and how you want to plan for that, especially with Season 2 Worlds. So I'm curious if we see a set like set 13 or maybe even 14 at this point be released, and then there is that 2-month gap to give the pros prepping for Worlds a sense of the preparedness that they need to go into that tournament, which almost puts us in the fall, early winter time frame of when Worlds would be. At least that's my prediction. I would say overall it doesn't really bother me. In a sense, I think it's just really unfortunate that we've had this excitement level, just the bar increase with the release of Pixar. I mean, I feel everyone's so excited, and like we can't like hold on to that a little bit longer, and we're just like breezing right through Toy Story and like the Supers and whatnot. I don't want that to continue to happen, as especially these very popular Pixar franchises are released in the near future. I don't know. That's just the way I feel. Any other touching points on that?
So kind of to that point, Mac, of like rushing through things, I think we're going to hold some space here to talk about those specific franchises and the cool cards and combinations and things like that, synergies that were introduced into the game through this podcast. So if that's something you're interested in holding on to for a little bit longer, spending some dedicated time on the next couple of weeks, then tune in. We got some couple of fun episodes coming for you then. But yeah, I feel that for sure. It just feels kind of rushed to get through the first Pixar set. It feels like the first Pixar set needed a little bit of extra time to breathe and room to ruminate before people moved on to the next thing.
So I'll put it this way. Why I think this is just like so fast sounding, right? Is we are recording this on the night of Monday, May 18th, right? Big box stores got their product, or officially were able to sell their product 3 days ago. Set champs are in 2.5 weeks. Like that's crazy, right? That like it would be that tight to like the, because like there's a pre-release weekend, right? And then there's like the mass release of everything. So it's like within then essentially 3 weeks from the like every store that can sell or kind of getting the product, within 3 weeks set champs will already be starting. So I think for that reason, right, like when you're trying to plan out a set for like in your own household, that can be kind of hectic, right? Like I brought it up to my wife and I was like trying to get to 3, and it was like, ooh, that's really soon, and like June, like we talked about, right? Like summertime. This is also kind of conflicting, right, with Indie as a big DLC in North America. So I think it's just, it feels like whiplash, and it's lining up with a time of year where, especially I think if you're in the Midwest, you're like trying to soak up as much of this nice weather as you can. So being indoors for 8 hours isn't always the most ideal thing, right? So I think that also, like, when I think about all those things kind of combined together, it's like, yeah, this is really fast. So for that reason, Mac, we didn't even talk about this, but we'll probably talk about it a little bit next week, but I'm really excited to be able to do some playtesting in person with you guys next week, because it's like, yeah, we'll need to. It'll be a week and a half before Set Champ starts. That just feels so crazy to me because these cards like legitimately just got released. So still exciting, but I think the best point that was just made, Mac, was your point about like these Pixar characters getting their time in the sun, and they might not really get that because it's going to be like bang next set already.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Like I said, I hope it doesn't continue, but I like Ryan's glass half full perspective. Like, it's just happy to have Pixar here, right? And let's just latch onto it where we have it, and then hopefully based on what we know so far with the calendar, things will continue to align as required for upcoming sets, and hopefully we get back to that 3-stage type of feeling like you alluded to earlier, Nathaniel.
Well, and Mac, I mean, yeah. to that end too, right? Like, there's some Pixar franchises that, like, yes, we're really excited about The Incredibles and Toy Story right now, but on the calendar, I mean, absolutely incredible franchises coming. I in particular am so excited for Coco. So like there's way more than that. There's Monsters Inc., right? Like, Pixar is such a massive set of franchises that, like, it feels like going forward there's always going to be, like, every set's going to have at least one that you probably really enjoy, if not more than one. Like, personally, this set, like, Brave wasn't like a huge franchise for me personally. I think there's some cool characters there, but like Toy Story and The Incredibles are like integral pieces of my childhood. So like for me, that's like, I want to really like be like, this is so awesome seeing these cards like exist now. So I think there'll still be very much that feeling for very much the foreseeable future, if not just for the rest of the time that Lorcana exists, because there's like a million Pixar movies.
Yeah, the future is looking bright for sure. So let's not, I guess, get too far ahead of ourselves, and let's stay in the now. One of the nows, right, that happened recently is this past weekend is the first kind of iteration of all these Infinity events. A lot going on, but I know there are like 3 main ones that we were kind of browsing over deck lists to see what has been popular, at least for stage 1 of Infinity. One was the Ink Open. There was a Weblore 2 tournament in Europe, and I think a 3rd tournament on Conflux, which is, I think, in Belgium. So all pretty good turnout, anywhere ranging from about 40 upwards to like 90 players. So I think a good first week 1 getting into post-set 12 inclusion of Infinity-related events. What is the first thing that stood out to us? Ryan, what do you got for us first?
The most interesting thing that I found when I was browsing these lists is the drastic disparity in ink color domination between the 3 events, right? So all 3 Infinity events, seemingly the same meta, but clearly Infinity meta is not solved. I think the Ink Open featured a ton of Amber Emerald decks at the top in the top 4. The Conflux Infinity Clash featured a bunch of Ruby Sapphire decks in the top 4, and then the Weblore 2, I believe, featured what was that? Let me check it again. Hang on.
Steel Song.
Oh, Steel Song. Obviously. Yes, of course. The Steel Song lists were all over the Weblore 2 list, top 4. So just the fact that there's so many different, like, that large of a disparity, even in, like, playstyle for those decks, to dominate their individual metas across the world was very interesting for me when I was taking a look at those lists.
I think one thing that really stuck out to me is how different Infinity seems to be going from where it was 6 months ago. I think that was right about the time, roughly 6 months ago, that we had the Infinity Whole New World event, right? That was taking place across maybe the whole world, or at least North America. And we were able to make it to one of those events. And, well, Mac, sorry, you were not able to, but some of us were able to go to that. And, I mean, from what I can remember between that and then shortly after, and even what was performing well during the Fabled meta too. So both sets 9 and 10, Infinity, Amber, Steel, Aggro seem to be very, very good. It seemed to be arguably best deck in the room. It just was able to do the most unfair thing really fast and create the most, call it, non-games. It kind of feels like that mantle has been really grabbed away from it as far as like the aggro deck and taken up by Amber Emerald, aka probably some form of Dog's List, as like the big bad, like aggressive or more aggressive, like can puke out lots of characters and create non-games list in the room. It feels like Amber Steel, if you're going to go that route, it kind of feels like you want to go more of the Steel Song route if you're going to kind of commit to that ink pairing. But I remember like back during set 10 Infinity, when we went to that event, like I was playing Amber Steel aggro and it felt maybe not quite Mack Thanos power with like Ruby Sapphire at zenith, but it was just like I'm doing so many unfair things in the first 4 or 5 turns of this game. And I would almost have thought with cards like Kood and some of these, Amber cards that have come out since then, that it would have gotten even better. But it does really feel like that mantle has been taken by Amber Emerald if you're going to go more of that, like, quest a lot in the first 6 or so turns and potentially create non-games. And part of that might be the fact that that list has refined and found a way to have a, albeit conditional, but pretty consistent with the list, board wipe with Under the Sea, where like if the player that's playing Amber Emerald gets that off by turn 4 or 5, it's just kind of over at that point, unless you're playing a very specific list with some very specific cards. But I was surprised by that, I think, to see that change happen from at least the Ink event. And then the other one being, Mac, you touched on this, Ruby Amethyst. So Ruby Amethyst pre-rotation was very much in that like top tier of decks, or at least like punching with the top tier of decks, right? Like I think back to the North American Championships pre-rotation, actually quite a bit before rotation, right? Where Ed Chu had played a list of Ruby Amethyst that was even refined to the point where it would punish Ruby Sapphire, because that was such a popular deck at the time. I would have thought that would have, and I think, Ryan, this touches on your point of the Infinity meta not really being solved yet, especially with how different the results were from one location to another. But Ruby Amethyst, I would have thought would have converted really well too. And it looks like there were 11 Ruby Amethyst players at this 57-player tournament. Only one of them made the top 8. And the win rate was only 49% for Ruby Amethyst. I'm kind of surprised by that. And I think maybe that is like, hey, it's a few cards kind of tweaking a little bit once the meta is more refined and it can kind of like tech towards that. Maybe that's what it needs. But I just feel like in any Infinity world, Ruby Amethyst has to be good, right?
I think Ruby Amethyst is the thing just lurking in the background and just waiting to strike, with, pun intended, the snake, Metamim snake for sure. I think people are trying to get used to how the bounce package works, because that was such a unique playstyle that we haven't really been exposed to, or at least been used to, ever since rotation. So that's been 8 months now that we haven't had the goats, the Merlin rabbits, the snakes, and the foxes, right? And how those kind of intertwine with each other. Sure, we've had the Madamin elephant, but like with the elephant, there really isn't any like positive, like super beneficial thing other than getting a really big body out. Stats at a lower cost, really, is the point of elephant, right? And I think the added benefit with especially goat is something that people got to get reused to, how to time specifically, and then how that balances with the new cards. I think the biggest one is how you still maintain the card draw that Ruby Amethyst had in the days of old, while being able to get to its kind of final form of controlling the board with that card draw. And I've seen over the weekend, like, the flavor is this new Scrooge, this 2-cost uninkable Scrooge where you boost it and then use all the boosted cards, eventually bouncing that with either a fox or a snake, and then all those cards follow the Scrooge back into your hand. So I think that's a really unique way that people are just playing with right now, and then they'll hone in on the specific numbers with that specific package. Yeah, I'm curious to see where Ruby Amethyst goes, because the way I felt with it is if you didn't have any answers to the locations, if they got to 7 ink, those locations being Queen's Castle and the library, good luck, because they can refuel their hands. They have all these beefy locations out here just consistently generating lore, and then they have now they're in what Ruby likes to do and just control when you have that much ink. So again, we'll see where it goes. I think a lot of other people wanted to get into, I think especially in the North American side with Ink, they wanted to test how well Ruby Sapphire was, because I know that's a fan favorite in North America, and then Steel Song. I think that's just a world favorite, was Steel Song, right? But Nathaniel, I'm surprised when you were talking about these Amber Emerald cards, you neglected to mention, I think, the new legendary from set 12 that I think really makes those Amber decks pop, especially bringing back an old term that we used to use, bringing back the weenies from days of old. That's what this Amber Emerald deck seems to do, and there's no one better than Dale. So talk about how Dale can do well in this Amber Emerald.
Yeah, I mean, Dale is amazing. So Dale is for those who are not familiar, Dale is one of the new legendary Amber cards from Wilds Unknown, and he has this 0-4 stat line, which seems not that great. However, the card text says that when, like, during challenges, your character's willpower is used to, like, calculate out their strength value. Now, I don't have the card in front of me, but it's essentially like if you have, for example, maybe you played out a Rapunzel, and she's a 1/5, right? So you did the Rapunzel thing, you drew some cards, played her out. When you play the Dale, the Rapunzel now is no longer, as far as it pertains to challenges specifically, this is an important part here, I think. She's not a 1/5 anymore. She's acting now as a 5/5. So, like, unless your opponent has a way to, like, remove based on the strength value, so things like Brawl would still work. Things like Sisu would still work, like, on that, because that's based on her strength value. But as it pertains to challenging, like, if you've got a deck that's built on, like, I need to challenge their guys down, a great example would be that Scrooge, right? Where you've, like, pumped him up a couple times. Now he's like a 4/4, 5/5. He would have to trade with that Rapunzel. He doesn't just get to, like, clear it and then take 1 damage anymore while the Dale's sitting there. So I don't know if he's that amazing in some of the Infinity lists, but I do think when people figure out the best way to deploy the Dale card, it can just be absolutely crazy when these high willpower characters are now, they have like Ruby level stats, right? But then they also get the high willpower too. So it's just like they kind of become crazy, and I do think that there's going to be ways where Dale kind of breaks a lot of what Amber really wants to do. Your daisies become 4/4s for challenges early in the game, and that's so crazy. So, and the fact that we're now cheating out characters early, so I think specifically like Dale in conjunction with the Willow is pretty scary. So I think that the playline that I could see that would be really hard for a lot of decks to handle in any format, whether it's Infinity or Core Constructed, would be like if you played a Daisy on 1, a Willow and a Daisy on 2, and then Ink for 3, play the Dale on turn 4. Your Daisies can quest freely. It doesn't really matter what they have. They're going to trade or KO whatever is trying to banish it in a challenge. I think it's going to just kind of go crazy, but I think it still needs to be solved. It's so early, right? As we just talked about, right? This card just became available like a week and a half ago. So I think it probably does take a little bit more time, but I think that card makes anything Amber suddenly potentially really scary. Because, Ryan, I think you made this point where with green decks, the card that was like a big swing card for them was often Cricky. So you'd like play him out, all your guys get +3, that's like an enormous stat buff, and you could just like crush someone's board that like had no idea that was coming. Dale can kind of do that, but you now have like the added pressure of like all this extra lore that you've been gaining. So you have some of the early lore that you've gotten because you have all these high questers. Now they're like ready to start positively challenging into your board. You play the Dale out and it's like, oh wait, I can't do that anymore. So if they can't remove the Dale, I feel like a lot of decks kind of just like lose right there because they can't positively trade. They're behind on lore. They have to basically throw lots of stuff into your guys that they probably wouldn't have wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think additionally, too, these Amber Emerald decks, some of them have been running the Snow Fort as well, so that just is just another stat buff across all of your characters as well with strength. And in addition, they've been pairing that with a newer Milan from set 11. Was that it? The Milan from set 11, where if you buff her up plus 6 strength, she can, or to a maximum of 6 strength, that's how much she can quest for or whatever. When she quests, she can get an additional 6 lore, which is absolutely crazy. And with the Snow Fort and having Dale on there and comboing that with a couple support characters as well in that ink pairing specifically, the Mulan can generate a ton of lore in a lore burst fashion that you don't traditionally see with that ink pairing. Yeah, that was kind of one of the big kind of eye-openers, especially, was how to navigate through that Amber Emerald list. I'm going to go quickly over to Ruby Sapphire, and then someone can talk about the Steel Song. First and foremost, a lot of the Ruby Sapphire that I saw specifically was the Shark build to see how we can rejuvenate DKP's famous Maui Shark build with all the actions and layering that with Be Prepared and this McDuck Manor and generating kind of closing the win with that specific card. One thing of note, a lot of them have replaced the Hiram with Cinderella. So essentially still getting that cycling effect with Cinderella, kind of the quasi card draw, and then pairing that hopefully by singing How Far I'll Go, just to keep your hand size healthy enough to eventually cycle the Paw Patrol, or the Paw Patrols, the Popsicles. I had that Paw Patrol in my mind because my boys had watched it earlier today. The Popsicles to draw with the Tamatoa, Happy as a Clam, as well as the Merlin's Carpet Bag. So I think that's the point of the Cinderella. I have not yet seen, or didn't really see any lists really of the item version of what Ruby Sapphire used to be, especially at the tail end of sets 7 and 8 with the Scrooge McDuck and the Maurice's Workshop. But that is like the control of the control lists, as you guys remember when we play tested back then. So I can only imagine, because it was only the first weekend, that those ones are still trying to figure out how they fit. But they'll eventually show up. I mean, those decks have plenty of card draw options, especially if you get the Workshop out and all the items now available in that specific ink combination. So it makes my heart happy if I ever make it to an Infinity event, but that's what I've noticed thus far from Ruby Sapphire. What else have we noticed?
I think one fun card that got added to something like a DKP list was this Olaf card from last set. I'm sure you guys have seen a little bit of this guy, but it's the Olaf Snowman of Action. For each action card in your discard, you pay 1 less ink to play this character. And when you play this character, each opponent loses 2 lore. So it's like actually kind of fits really nicely into what like Ruby Sapphire is doing, especially when it's an action-based deck, because you get to get him out. He's a 9 cost, right? So that you got to have a lot of actions to like make him feel more reasonable as far as how much you're paying to play him. But the fact that you're going to pay him out there, he's going to make them lose 2 ink, and he's a 4/4 quest for 2. If you can get him down for like 4 or 3 ink, that feels pretty good. The fact that it's like half of the pirate's life, but you also get this body to quest for 2 the next turn. I think that card is a really fun and very good inclusion to that list. It's actually one of the few like additions to that from what I can see. It feels like it's basically a 4 of that, and then like some Firefly Swarms. Which is an interesting like new age brawl, right? Where it's got this kind of conditional thing where it can act as a brawl, but it could also, in some of these more control heavy matchups where each player is maybe only playing like one bigger character per turn, it can be now like a Dragonfire if you put a couple cards into your discard. Which, either way, guys, I'm actually really curious about this, because this is probably like a little bit of a judge ruling question. But if you have something go in your discard. So if my turn is, I'm going to banish one of my Popsicles. That's my first card in the discard. I exert 3 ink and I play Firefly Swarm. Does that count as the second card in my discard or not, because that effect is now in the bag before the card is reaching the discard pile?
Rule is you need to resolve the card before it technically enters the discard. So in that case, you would only be able to resolve the banish a character with 2 strength or less because the Firefly Storm has not yet entered the discard because it hasn't completed its resolution. So if you were to have a second Firefly Storm, for example, then you could then do the kind of the Dragonfire effect. But yeah, you need to complete the card before it enters the discard is the way that I have been reading the rules, because I think that question has come up in a number of community like servers and chats and whatnot since the release of that specific card. And a lot of these, once you have 2 cards in your discard, you get this X effect. There's been a lot of those released this past set 12.
And like, for what it's worth too, like, what deck does it better, like getting lots of cards into your discard than like a DKP action list, right? Like, you could banish Popsicle, play it, develop your brain, or a Sail, right? Like, you have all these ways to get cards into your discard pile pretty easily per turn. So that actually is a really cool, like, call it an upgrade. Yes, it's uninkable, but like, it's a really fun, I think, like, side grade from Brawl, right? So I think that's kind of fun to see. Card that is doing something slightly different and maybe even potentially upgrading it than just like having Brawl exist forever.
I think back to that Firefly Swarm rules question, I think it more so is the fact that you like the trigger is when the card is played, like Mack had mentioned, where you decide at that moment that what is happening. Whereas if it were worded slightly differently, and I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know what the wording would be to make it different than that, but if the wording were slightly different, where it was not a choice or an option at the start of the card being played, then I think it could be a factor there. And then the fact that this Firefly Swarm is either Brawl or Dragonfire, depending what you need it to be, if you have other cards accessible to enter the discard. It just feels like it's this hybrid card that kind of sits somewhere between Brawl and Dragonfire. Obviously, being uninkable makes it a little bit more of a deck building challenge to fit it in, but it still has this like dual purpose and flexibility opportunity for it, which I think is coveted by competitive players, to say the least.
I think also, now that I'm reading the actual card itself, it actually says if 2 or more other cards were put into your discard. So even if you did interpret it as this card entering, it still wouldn't matter. So that's probably an important caveat there that I'm just realizing now, is it actually says 2 or more other cards were put into your discard. So it's pretty clear, even if I think there were to be like a dispute at the table, once that other is in that wording, it's pretty clear that this can't count towards one of those 2.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So Mack, you mentioned Ruby Sapphire needs a little bit of time to figure out its list and figure out how to make things strong. I think one of the things that could help that is Steel Song finding a solid footing in the Infinity meta, and there was a couple of lists that managed to top the Web Lore event. One of the actually first overall list, the winner, had a very interesting list that I think leveraged the power of Dale very well as leaning into the Steel Song mentality, Steel Song deck list as well. So one of the interesting interactions with the Dale card specifically is they played Dale. They also played Aerial Sonic Warrior, which becomes a terrifying card when Dale is sitting in the hand or sitting on board as well, being an 8 willpower character. Whether you're challenging with it or whether you're singing your 21 songs or 20 some odd songs, depending on your build, to ping damage around your opponent's board with the Aerial Sonic Warrior, it just becomes this like stalwart that is near impossible to remove if there's not spot removal or a board wipe available. And so sticking that plus then a Dale behind it seems very, very terrifying to sit across the table from. Dale also then leverages, as Nathaniel mentioned earlier with Daisy, the 1/4 stat line. The 1/4 stat line of Ursula Vanessa becomes pretty impactful, where Ursula Vanessa usually is this like very flimsy body that once they sing a song, you can rush like a fox in, and it's a fox lives. A fox remains on the field, and Ursula Vanessa is banished. Fox has 1 damage, and it's not really, it'll take another card to remove it, and so then you're 2 for 1ing your opponent. Whereas with Dale down, now Ursula Vanessa is protected from that, and the Fox can only take just the Vanessa, and that's it. Which, again, it's minor card economy throughout the course of the game that then decides the end result, right? This list, again, like playing the Rapunzel, obviously you have to play with the Rapunzel. Leveraging the Akud at Amudi to cheat out a bunch of characters very, very early. And then also playing a 5th copy of Pete by playing 1 copy of Keep the Ancient Ways as another song to sing and ping damage with the Aerial Sonic Warrior. So I think Steel Song has a very solid framework now to lean on, and I think all the Steel Song players around the world are going to lean into this archetype for Infinity events. And then I think red, blue, or ruby, sapphire has an opportunity to really, be the big bad in the room yet again, as we all know and love it from pre-rotation and from other Infinity events.
Yeah, I will say though, without Hiram, obviously Ruby Sapphire is nerfed a little bit. Just not having that consistent card draw as we would expect out of a Hiram-based Ruby Sapphire list. One thing of note too, especially with the Snowfort builds coming out of the Amber Emerald lists, the fact that all of your characters have this strength boost. Sisu becomes a little bit more irrelevant because it's easier for those characters to get into that 3 strength threshold, which Sisu does not like. Which makes me think that those item lists are just around the corner because of the Sapphire Coil to reduce the strength for Sisu. And then as well as that new song, I think Lost Their Head or something like that. I think that'll become very important come the Infinity-based metagame if that item deck gets figured out from a Ruby Sapphire side of things. Because a lot of the Ruby Sapphire builds that I noticed did not have Sisu in anticipation of that build with the Snowfort. And they're trying to strictly leverage the Be Prepared as your board wipe and just go from there. The Olaf, I think, had taken that big high-cost character in place of the Sisu because it can slow it down because it acts like Pirate's Life on a body. And it can sing Dig a Little Deeper, which is another card draw option as a 1 character singing that massive 8-cost uninkable Sing Together song. So just kind of refueling your hand. So it's funny though, a lot of the titles of the deck lists that we saw were just like Ruby Sapphire, a pile of cards, and like Ruby Amethyst, let's see what works. It's just like you can tell that this was definitely the first weekend of kind of a mid-tier event type of Infinity style. So even the really skilled high-level pro style players are getting used to what this Infinity format wants to see. I think one thing of note I have for Infinity before I'll pass it off to you guys for final notes, don't forget about Diablo. Just because we did not see a lot of lists with Diablo this iteration, Diablo was a fan favorite and, someone's arch nemesis all at the same time, pre-rotation. Be aware of Diablo. Like, if you're a Ruby player, your Brawls or that new Firefly Storm, you have your evasive answers, things of that nature, because it's only a matter of time before those Diablo discard decks start making its presence known again. So be aware of it, because it will come, and I will not be excited when I see Emerald, and be very nervous once I see that, unless it's paired with Amber, and even that Amber Emerald, the discard package, that can be really scary as well. So Diablo, keep an eye on it. What other final thoughts do you guys have?
Emerald, I think, will probably find a way to be really good again. To your point, Mac, I think it's, Ryan has referred to it as the parasite color. I think in order to be a parasite, you got to kind of figure out what you're going to leech off of and kind of punish. So I think it will, once we kind of settle in a little more, I think there will be very much a green presence felt. And yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily use the B word, the ban word, a whole lot, but I could definitely see at some point, if the discard package ever does get really strong in an Infinity meta, I could see Prince John going away. That is a card that, I think when you think about, generally speaking, when you have somebody discard a card, usually you're paying a card to do that. So a great balanced card, I think, is something like Sudden Chill. I have to, sure, I could sing it, but I'm burning a card to have them lose a card, right? That's a fair thing. But when you start to make it so they lose a card while you gain a card, and all of a sudden you're getting this really good benefit from making them discard, that whole engine just becomes kind of crazy. And even cards what's that hypnotic, whatever that one is where you pay 3, they discard, you draw a card, that feels pretty good, but you're usually taking a turn or most of a turn to do that thing, unless it's pretty late. But yeah, I think, the fact that the discard package can be built around creating this incredible snowballing card economy for you while discarding their hand feels really mean. I would never play a deck like that, right, personally, but just kidding, I did. But like, I could definitely see like a future ban list like that feels like public enemy number one, right? Is Prince John greediest of all? Like, I could totally see it, and because he's Ward, that does create issues. Like, I know Ryan's nemesis, the Muses, is very similar in that aspect, but I think Prince John creates more of like an even more frustrating game oftentimes against a lot of lists.
Agreed. Get him out of here. That's how I feel about Prince John. But we forgive you, Nathaniel, because I think, after all the ridicule that you received, not only from us, but I think you just noticed the online community being so frustrated, you did pivot very quickly off that deck. So kudos to you for moving from that very mean deck. But that's the first iteration of Infinity. We will for sure talk about it more, especially as we get past and through the upcoming DLCs. That's a huge topic that we want to highlight when it comes to the Infinity scene, and that's also a couple weeks away as well. So we'll wrap up Infinity for this week, but for our final topic of this week's episode, let's talk about Set 12 toys. Let's go back to Core Constructed. We have two main lists that we wanted to discuss tonight, and then we'll see if we just want to wing it off the cuff with any more lists. But I think, Nathaniel, if you could bring up those lists, and then whatever one you want to pull up first, we'll just start chatting about it. We'll chat about what these decks want to do, what we've noticed in our own play testing, and go from there, because it might not be super important now, but coming rotation Iteration 2, these could be very, very popular when we get to there. So, which one do we have up now, Nathaniel?
Can you guys see the Ruby Amber list here? Woody's Roundup?
Sure can.
So I will not pretend like I am a toys or a Ruby Amber expert of any kind, but I think this is, in my opinion, the really fun toys list. Because I think this one leans fully into what toys is kind of trying to do, and is very much focused on almost all toys. Like, if you look at this list, right, like, it is almost every card in here is a toy except for the Headless Horseman, the Horseman Strikes, and Be Our Guest. Otherwise, every other card is centered around toys and doing toy things. And this list actually kind of harkens back to a comment that Ryan made that I think was very astute early, in that Sid would become this build-around card. And I think Ruby Amber Toys is very much centered around doing that, in particular with a couple cards. So the Pterodactyl Janie doll, it looks so unassuming and just harmless, but like, this card, when you have like a Sid engine going, is absolutely crazy. Because if this gets to like sit around because they don't want to waste, removal or whatever on this little thing, and this is sitting on the board when they play their Sid legendary, for those that aren't watching the screen right now, the Pterodactyl Janie doll is a 1-cost, 1/1 quest for 1. During your turn, when this character is banished, each opponent loses 1 lore, and you gain a lore. And the reason why this is so kind of cracked is when Sid Phillips, the 6-cost uninkable legendary, comes down, he's a 5/5 quest for 2. When you play this character, you may banish another chosen character of yours. If you do, each opponent chooses and banishes one of their characters. And during your turn, whenever a toy character is banished, you gain 2 lore. So basically, you can have a turn where like your Pterodactyl quests for 1, you play the Sid, banish that Pterodactyl, gain 2 more from the Sid, 1 more from the Pterodactyl. So now the Sid Pterodactyl combo has gotten you 4 lore while they lose a lore. And you've just established this 5/5 quest for 2. I think that is like a crazy line. And then there's also tons of other like synergies with some of these Ruby cards, like the Baby Head, and like Wind Up Frog is really cool. But I think this does like a really cool job of just like leaning fully into toys, because even like the card draw mechanism here is like really centered around toys. So there's the Woody Shift line. So for those who aren't familiar with the 1-cost, we talked about the need for vanilla shift targets. So that is the Woody 2/2 1-cost quest for 1, but you're really playing him so that you can get out the 5-cost uninkable Woody, who's a 1/5 quest for 2, but he's a shift 3. And so whenever this character quests, draw a card, then you may play a card or a character with cost 2 or less for free, and your other toy characters get 1 extra willpower. So very notable, right? Especially if Woody comes down later, that you can bump up the willpower of your toys. What are your guys' thoughts to this? I think it's super fun.
This is the deck that I really want to try out. Specifically, I think it just looks fun. Sid is one of my favorite villains from the Pixar movies, so that's something that I've really wanted to try out, especially when this card was first released. And I think not only to your point, Nathaniel, when you play Sid, especially with that pterodactyl card, that's not only a 5 lore swing, essentially, gaining 4, upwards of 4 if you quest with the pterodactyl first, which you should, and then them losing a lore, so 5 lore swing. Also, it forces your opponent to then banish a card, so don't forget about that. So you get lore advantage and board advantage all in kind of one play. Again, it's very much high rolly. You need to ensure that you have the right characters on the board all at once, but I mean, you don't have to use Sid just on the pterodactyl. You have like 40,000 toys in your deck, so it's pretty easy to take advantage of the Sid banish effect with banishing a toy for sure. I know you guys have done a little bit more play testing than I have up to this point. I think one character card that you also can't lose sight of is this Jesse, this 3-cost inkable Jesse, the 3/3 quest for 1. Whenever this character quests, if you have 2 or more other toy characters in play, which isn't difficult, you may draw a card, and then whenever you pay 2 ink or less to play a card, chosen opposing character gets -1 strength until the start of your next turn. Jesse, I think, is a super important and strong draw engine, specifically in this deck, but maybe one of you guys can speak to the importance of Jesse. Not only is she important here, she is truly important in a lot of different, or like she's a staple in all toys decks in general. What do you guys got?
I think the biggest thing with Jesse is, in this Amber Ruby list, is the card draw. So Jesse's going to turn sideways, get a card, and then you're attempting to keep Jesse around for the next turn to do it again. So you're going to try to spam out with a bunch of little characters, maybe ink another time or two to kind of get your ink total up to get to that Sid Phillips level. And really just kind of, Jesse's just a distraction there for your opponent to have to worry about another card draw engine. There's a number of different card draw engines in the deck. So Nathaniel mentioned the Shift Woody. There's the Jesse card that we just talked about. There's the 4-cost uninkable Baby Head, that when you trade your characters on your turn, or whenever one of your other characters is banished during your turn, you may draw a card. So in Nathaniel's perfect magic land of everything goes right and I see all the cards I want, you have a Janie doll or multiple Janie dolls, you have a Baby Head, and then you play a Sid Phillips. So you are gaining 4 lore, your opponent's losing a lore and a character, you banish your Janie doll, and you draw a card off of it then too. So really just layering on the synergies to make it happen. So that's a draw engine. Babyhead also has this effect of boosting your character's strength values to make more positive trades. So you can maybe boost that Janie doll if you don't have a Sid Phillips in hand. You could boost that Janie doll to 3 or 5 strength with the Babyhead triggers, and then you could trade up into something and then draw a card and gain a lore and all that jazz off of it as well. So there's some layered synergies there. And then the final 2 card draw options, 3 would be the 4-cost Woody, which is like search your top 4 cards, or look at the top 4 cards of your deck and grab a toy character out of that, or a location card named Andy's Room. But I don't think this list is playing Andy's Room, so it's grabbing another toy character to kind of keep fuel in your hand. And then the Be Our Guest and the You've Got a Friend in Me cards. You've Got a Friend in Me is really crazy in this deck, but the Be Our Guest then is that same look at the top 4, pick a character card. And then the You've Got a Friend in Me is absolutely nuts. It's look at the top 4 and reveal up to 2 toy characters and put them into your hand, and then the rest on the bottom in any order. So if you have Sid Phillips in hand and you're just looking for more toy characters to lay on the board, or if you just want to sing a 3-cost inkable draw 2 again because you miss friends from the other side, friends on the other side, then here's your card. 3-cost inkable draw 2. It's no longer an amethyst, now it's an amber, but you still have your draw 2 option. And so those are kind of the major card draw options. And then with the Jesse and Baby Head triggers to try to like leverage some positive trades for your board compared to theirs. This is it's a little bit of a fragile list because it kind of just curves out on the first few turns. It doesn't cheat a ton out other than maybe an early bullseye, but Everything else is kind of just on curve until maybe you hit the Shift Woody, and if you don't have the Shift Woody, then it's really everything is on curve until you finally get up to a Sid Phillips. And so if your opponent has, if you're playing against an Amethyst deck and they have Elsas or they have Demonas or they're playing Isis Vanderchill or they're playing Tiggers or things like that, that are just going to force the interactions with your board, it can feel a little bit underpowered if you're just curving out to get to Sid Phillips. But if you're able to find those explosive openers where you have the Shift Woody with the Bodyguard Protectors maybe, and then you play the Jessies as well, and maybe you actually just play you go Woody, Bullseye, Jessie, and the next turn you shift the Woody, and you play a Rex for free, and you draw with the Jessie, and now you've effectively drawn 2 extra cards that turn. You've probably decreased one character's strength by at least one for until the start of your next turn, and you're really starting to get that engine to churn. But again, it can be pretty fragile if your opponent has the force interaction or the opportunities to take out those cards before they really get you that benefit, because there's only, I think, 15 or 18 card draw options in the deck, and otherwise you're just kind of curving out to a 6-cost uninkable, which you're going to run out of cards if you're on the play to get to Sid Phillips. And if you're on the draw, then you have 1 extra card in your hand, which doesn't feel, great. You have 1 card to play after Sid Phillips, which you're hoping it's some sort of card draw then. But yeah, it's really interesting, and I think with the power down with rotation, as you briefly mentioned before, Mack, that this list will be refined by then and will definitely be very, very strong because of the layered synergies and the opportunity to have a lot of those cards survive to leverage those synergies in a very nice way.
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts on this. I feel like there's a world where at some point, like, Jessie with like an Akud could kind of go crazy. Right? Like, not her singing it, but like another character singing Akud. Like, being able to cheat out like a bigger thing, because it's specifically when you pay 2 ink or less to play a card. So you could, like, conceivably, if you cheat out your Bullseye, like you went Woody on 1, Bullseye on 2, Jessie on 3, and then the next turn, like, Bullseye sings Akud, you could play the Woody for 2. He gets to do his thing while also triggering Jessie. Like, that's kind of crazy. Like, there probably are some crazy lines here, where, like, yeah, and then, like, of course there's the Shift Woody as well. So, like, I'm thinking of the 4-cost Woody, where you get to, like, look for more cards. So that you'd play for 2. So I think there's, like, definitely some cool synergy here. And my other point is, wow, Babyhead is a horrifying character. I'm reminded, like, looking at this thing again, my goodness, I don't want that anywhere near me in my deck or my opponent's deck, or having even to look at this thing. It is insane. 1 eye, just a head on, like, a claw body. That's horrifying. Who thought of that? Anyways, I think that's kind of the gist of the Ruby Amber list. Let's talk about another, I think, fun toy list, where this one felt like the really fun one, where it's like fully, I'm leaning all the way in, full stop, into toys. The other one is a little bit less, but I think it's also extremely powerful. And that is going to be
I
your
think this
Amber
is the list I'm
Emerald.
most terrified of, with toy synergies involved, just because of it's already a high power level deck, and now we're adding in some very key synergies that are going to help the deck do even better. And so I am interested to hear more about it. And obviously we saw Amber Emerald do quite well at Infinity events as well. So I think there's a world where this is a strong deck no matter what format you're playing. Nathaniel, do you want to intro everybody?
Yeah, so for those who can't see the screen, if you think about a dog's core of just the big tramp, so a playset of that, a playset of the small 2-cost tramp that buffs your characters, Grandmother Willow that we've seen before, and then Della's Moon Lullaby, Under the Sea, and Nani. So that's, what is that? That's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 25. It's almost half the deck being sort of this, like, what we have known to be Amber Emerald dogs decks that we've seen the past couple sets that have done really, really well. But the rest of this deck is a lot of the cards that we just talked about that are of the Amber variety, with the key differences being the RC card, which is a really unique card. I tried to make this thing work during during pre-release weekend. It was somewhat underwhelming there, but I think in this type of deck it could kind of go crazy. But RC Car is a really interesting Emerald card that is a 1-cost, 3/2, quest for 2, crazy stat line, but this character can't quest or challenge unless you pay 1 ink. So in a deck that's just sort of spitting out a lot of characters and then eventually questing for a lot, that's kind of amazing because it only is a 1-cost. The Alien is another Emerald 1-cost, and this character gets +1 strength for each other toy character you have in play. He's only a 1/1, quest for 1, and then during your turn, when this character is banished, return another character named Alien from your discard to your hand. The Buzz Lightyear is really cool here, I think. This is the 2-cost 3/3. That seems to be, guys, a really common thing that is now extending to every ink color, that there is going to be a 2-cost 3/3, which historically that's like a really high stat line for a 2-cost, right? Like I think the first time we ever saw effectively that was like Calhoun being a 3/2 but resist 1, right? And then she obviously has that other amazing fact that you like when she banishes you get the +2 lore, but it does feel like the like stat only, so like vanilla 2-cost can be 3/3, and that's like pretty normalized in most ink combinations. And then the other notable Emerald card is Lenny. He's a 3-cost 0/2 quest for 1. When you play this character, chosen opponent reveals their hand and discards an action card of your choice. Once during your turn, whenever you play an action, you may ready this character. So that's kind of crazy because he could basically like quest and then you could like have him sing, or I guess you could just like sing Della's Moon Lullaby, and that would like, you could like nerf their guy, draw a card, he gets to just like re-ready from that. So that's kind of crazy. And then of course it's got the You've Got a Friend in Me. And the Under the Sea thing in conjunction with Jesse and Della is really scary. Ryan, to your point, this feels like the deck that could create some non-games. Just like Dogs has historically been able to do the past couple sets, when it's like, you know, I play a card, you play a card, etc. for a couple turns, but then they nerf my bigger guys with Jesse and Della, and then you sing Under the Sea and board wipe me, and you still have like 4 or 5 characters, and the game's basically over.
Yeah, this one is interesting in the sense that the deck that we compare it to is the, I'll say, current version of Dogs, which has a lot of the ladies, especially the Shift Lady. One thing that I think the main difference in my simplistic brain when it comes to thinking about Dogs, because that's not how my brain works, is this deck is the traditional Dogs list with all the ladies has a lot of interaction with your discard and picking out the correct cards from your discard based on all the cycling you have done in previous turns. And it kind of has more aggression with a Daisy Duck, for example, or it has the strength reduction tool of the hamster. What is it? The rhino. I think Jesse here replaces that effect just on a consistent basis for sure. But the benefit to the rhino is it's only a 1-cost, right? So, and cycling within your discard, that's what the lady in that deck wants to do. This list is in the same way wanting to do this, a similar thing, but doing so with cards like the You've Got a Friend in Me. It's more card-based or reveal-based kind of card draw. With the You've Got a Friend in Me, you can put up to 2 toy characters in your hand. There are a lot of toys in this list, so that's where you kind of get your card draw effect is in something like that. One thing of note in this specific list that you have on screen, Nathaniel, if you'll go back to kind of the 1-cost stage, I really don't like RC Car because I think it's too conditional. I think the Bobby can make a lot of sense as a replacement here. The thing that you got to be of note is the another main reason why the RC car is here is that You've Got a Friend in Me hits more toys. So you have almost that guaranteed card draw effect. But the Bobby, I think, is super important in this type of list with cycling that alien card. Because then it's just the never-ending alien cycle. You'll get one immediately in your discard, or in theory you can. And then once you get that second one out there, alien is just never ending, right? So something to keep in mind. It might not be the best one as of right now, but maybe as you're kind of, if you want to run a deck like this, don't lose sight of Bobby and being able to cycle that alien effect. But that's the way I see the two main differences. If you like the interaction with the discard, go with the dogs version. If you like that more toys-based card draw with the You've Got the Friend in Me and kind of the Jesse synergy with the reduction in strength, I think that's where this deck really shines in conjunction with this ink combination.
Yeah, I think well said, Mac. When I look at this and I think about the differences, part of the best thing that like a dogs list would do, and I'm not going to pretend like I am some sort of dogs expert by any means, but it felt like it was the most explosive, or it is the most explosive, when you get your bobbies to do discard things, and then you get your tramp to do like the filter and discard things, so that then the lady becomes this card draw thing. Whereas this has some consistency in the sense that like Jesse and Woody and You've Got a Friend in Me are all like looking through your deck, which is stuffed full of toys. So like the odds of missing that are pretty low. So it does feel like this does provide like maybe a little bit more consistency than strictly relying on like a very specific set of like, well, if I don't see tramp and discard a bunch of things, suddenly lady is not quite as powerful for me, especially like in this like earlier game where maybe nothing's banished yet. So I think that's really interesting to me, where maybe this becomes this more consistent thing where you're able to really apply a lot of pressure because the odds of you hitting these cards and drawing lots more, again, drawing with Amber is like, what the heck? But it's becoming a thing.
I think where I see this deck really going crazy is if we, obviously this is leaning heavily, as we mentioned, is leaning heavily into the toy synergies and the toy card filtering and card searching. But if we merge this with like current version of dogs with ladies, more of the lady shift package, because I think that is important for getting your Under the Seas sung more consistently as well. And then kind of, splitting the difference, maybe not playing as many You've Got a Friend in Me's, maybe playing a little bit more of like obviously the ladies and maybe some more Lennies, so you can have some extra singing power. But then I think merging and creating a happy medium between the dogs list and the toys list, I think, is where I find this being terrifying, because that Jesse becomes that repeatable Rhino effect when you're playing out your characters for cheap, especially if you have a Grandmother Willow out there. Obviously, you get an extra trigger basically every turn of the Jesse effect with the strength reduction. I think that's where we get very worried about things when I see that type of hybrid build coming out, and I think that'd be an interesting way to take this type of list too.
Yeah, great point. Toys is here to stay. I think what we've learned throughout our playtesting and all of this is if it's not going to be staple now, it will be in the next set. Toys is going to be super important, so get used to it in your playtesting. People are going to be playing it, and we'll just see where it goes. And as we start to see more Pixar-type cards release in the upcoming sets, which is super, super, super exciting. Any last thoughts on toys in general, gentlemen, before we wrap up this episode?
One toy I didn't mention is Ham, Piggy Bank. This is fun to see him in Disney Lorcana. So this is a 2-cost, 2/3 quest for 1, and he is kind of like the new age, I think it was Pluto did this in past sets, where he exerts and you pay 1 less for the next character you play this turn. So Ryan, to your point, like there's worlds where maybe this in conjunction with like an early Willow becomes like really snowbally, where all of a sudden they're cheating out like a ton of ink early. And he also could have some nice synergy with Jesse, where all of a sudden now you're exerting the Ham and playing something bigger, but now because it costs 2, it triggers the Jesse. So this looks pretty cool and kind of scary, and maybe it becomes, to Mack's point, really, really good very soon. That's all I got.
Yeah, great last point. I mean, Amber, the new favorite color, especially with this new cheating out ink abilities that almost every one of these cards seem to have these days. But we will see where it goes in the near future when it comes to toys. There's a lot more coming. We will do another couple of these throughout the iteration of set 12, as we want to talk about the Incredibles or supers in general. And then we'll get into a couple, I think, of Brave topics, because that was the last of the 3 main Pixar franchises released in set 12 in the first iteration of Pixar in Disney Lorcana. In addition to that, we'll also talk a lot more about Infinity, because that is happening too in the near future, and there's a lot to be excited about in Disney Lorcana. That being said, let's put a wrap on this show. You can find us on YouTube. That's where we post our audio and video files, as well as other audio locations, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please tune in. We also post on Instagram from time to time, having a couple little shorts here and there, as well as including a lot of our more recent guests on a lot of our posts on Instagram. So tune in there. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Excited to continue this life journey of Disney Lorcanet. But until next time, let's get the duck out of here.